просимо займати місця. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please take your seats in the hall? We'll give it 1 minute because we will be starting our civil society side event at the Lugano Recovery Conference. Welcome, вітаємо вас, шановні пані і панове. Дуже просимо, займайте місця в залі. Тут є теж місця в перших рядах, будь ласка, проходьте ближче. Welcome to Lugano. Welcome to Ukraine Recovery Conference side event. My name is Zorisa Lutsevich. I am the head of Ukraine Forum at Chatham House. It's a London-based think tank, and I have an honor to start our side event today by inviting two people to give their welcoming remarks. First is Olena Pavlenko, who is the president of Dixie Group, and she is the member of the EU-Ukraine Civil Society Platform. Olena.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to the Ukraine Reform Conference. Despite the war and all travel problems, so many Ukrainians and friends of Ukraine gathered today in Lugano and online. This is another message to the world that Ukrainians are resilient and strong. And while some of us protect our territory from Russian aggression, others have responsibility to build a process which will make our country successful and prosperous. My name is Olena Pavlenko. I represent EU-Ukraine Civil Society Platform, which unites around 200 Ukrainian organizations, civil society organizations, trade unions, and employers. With many other coalitions, networks, and associations represented today, we are voice of millions of Ukrainians who already help Ukraine as volunteers and civic activists, donate to army, advise to government, advocate Ukrainian position abroad, and fight with Russia at the battlefront. Many of our friends died in this fight for Ukraine, and I would like to ask you to honor them with a minute of silence. Thank you. Civil society drives Ukraine's history. It defined Ukraine's future in 2004, in 2013. It is part of the fight with Russia now. Civil society has capacity and knowledge to rebuild Ukraine. Why? Because no donors will have enough experts and consultants to oversight the effectiveness of the reform's implementation. Because only people who live in Ukraine know local specific and the best and can reach the best impact. Because in the triangle, civil society, donors, and government, allocation of funds, implementation of the reconstruction of project, monitoring results, civil society organizations will be the best placed to advise and to assess. With such a unique place, civil society organizations should have both rights and responsibilities. Civil society must have a right to participate in the development of national and regional strategies and plans, together with government and European partners. I can provide an example of the EITI, Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative implementation, when there is a multi-stakeholder group which consists of the government, business, and civil society organizations, and we work together. Thanks to such cooperation, Ukraine is now one of the best EITI countries in the world. CSOs should participate in the rebuilding process not only as invited guests, but as a full-fledged party of the dialogue. Because we have something where government is more weak, possibility to learn fast and provide creative decisions. CSOs' involvement into the development of national reconstruction plan is extremely important. Civil society organizations should work at the plan at all stages of its development and finalization. As of the responsibilities, we must ensure that our work is professional. Being professional means that we must have sufficient knowledge to provide high-quality analysis, innovative approaches, and recommendations to the government. And CSOs should apply to themselves the same standards they demand from the government. We must also demonstrate our own high standards of transparency and accountability to ensure that our assessment of governmental policy is objective. Most of us came here with the documents with principles and red lines for the rebuilding of Ukraine. Many of such documents will be presented today and tomorrow. Lugano Manifest, Rise UA Coalition Manifest, principles which were developed by economic and energy Ukrainian CSOs, 50 principles which were developed by 50 NGOs in environmental and energy sectors. With many authors, those principles echo each other, and I would like to mention only some of them. First, compliance with the EU legislation, not formally but substantially. For example, the reform of labor legislation should also mean compliance with the EU rules and protection of labor rights. Second, transparency and accountability to maintain the trust of both donors and citizens of Ukraine. Third, green recovery and sustainable development goal principles should be integrated everywhere, not just in the environment and energy sectors. Fourth, digitalization to ensure that all procedures are easy and fast to go through. Fifth, sustainability and long-term orientation. The actions should be focused on long-term results for Ukraine and its citizens. Six, aggressor should pay. In our list of sources of finance, we should be able to count on the Russian money frozen abroad. To be professional and to have capacity to participate in the rebuilding process, CSOs also should have enough resources and be supported by donor community. We believe that donor and partner support will be properly directed to reconstruction of Ukraine in accordance with the principle Build Back Better, as well as for the CSO's development. A few weeks ago, at one of the conferences in the US, someone said that Ukraine has the greatest soft power in the world, thanks to the civil society. We are a society of networks, where horizontal communication among people is essential. It helps us to create effective volunteer movement, to organize Maidans. This is part of the answer why Ukraine remains so resilient despite 400 years of war with Russia. Today, our network has to set up the ground which will help Ukraine to stay resilient and strong for the centuries. I'm sure that we can do this. Let me wish fruitful discussion and really impactful results to all of us from our meeting these days. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Elena. I think you've already given quite a big sway of thoughts and principles to discuss. But now I would like to invite our host, Patrizia Danzi, who is Ambassador, Director General of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Patrizia, please address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all coming here. Thank you for the nice words. Actually, you said it all. Maybe I just go down and leave it up to you. But I would like to welcome you all to Lugano. I'm talking on behalf of the co-host of this Ukraine Recovery Conference that we are organizing together with Ukraine. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, please take Lugano as a starting point for something new. Take also the event of what it is for you as a platform. I'm very glad that we can open somehow the event with the civil society. Switzerland has a very vibrant civil society too, so we very much believe in the power of the civil society for change and for carrying everything that is related to reforms and transformation. So I know that for some of you that traveled so far, for so long, this seems maybe a bit odd to find yourself near a lake, people outside, and normal life again, like a pause. So we don't know what you're going through these days, these months. We simply don't know. We have a lot of sympathy and empathy for what you're experiencing, and we hope that we can support you in all what you do. I have been to Ukraine a year ago to places like Svierodonetsk, Lysychansk, places that have a different meaning to me, different meaning definitely to you. And it's very, very a difficult feeling to hear on the radio and on the news what is happening to places that, you know, I can only imagine what this means for you all. So please voice your voice that you have here in Lugano, and make us understand a bit better where you come from and what you want to achieve with your country, because you are in charge. And I have seen many places of war, many conflicts in my life. I have never seen a war where the civil society, the government, you actually keep control, you get in contact with your citizens, you speak in the name of your people, of your country, and this is a very good start also for what we want to construct together these couple of days as a starting point, not as an end. Maybe just also thank you very much for the host of this event today. SUPSI is a university that is also supporting civil society a lot of the values we share. So thank you for hosting us today. I have 3 messages, maybe just to get on the way, that we would like you to focus or to get along the way in your discussions this morning and these days. The civil society plays an important role in the recovery as a whole of society event and approach. Recovery can also only be successful, well, after the war has stopped, but also after and if the society is participating, if democratic reforms are continuing, and if also people that come back after the war or are internally displaced can participate in what they want to achieve and what is important for them. Second, recovery must not leave anyone behind. It sounds obvious, but inclusiveness, gender issues, sometimes we tend to forget it. They say it's now important, we are at the war, so gender can wait, inclusiveness can wait. It cannot. It's there from the start. It has been there before and has to continue to be part of any reform and recovery that we are doing. As well as, of course, human rights, but that goes together. And lastly, recovery must lead, in our view, to a stronger Ukraine. You have successfully embarked in already 4 reform conferences, and recovery can actually deepen, broaden many of the reforms that you have already done. It can accelerate it, and you can actually use it as a chance also, and see the advantage of what it can bring. There will be money coming to Ukraine. It's not a pledging conference that we are in today, but if we talk about recovery, we talk about sums of money, infrastructure that needs to be built, and their accountability, transparency is very, very important. And the civil society, you are the ones that will be also guarding this. You will be also the guardian of the principles, the Lugano principles. You mentioned other principles, but they're all very similar to what a state needs as a base for any recovery and reform that it wants to achieve. And if you were not so vibrant, we wouldn't be able to have these principles. You have talked not only since February, but since decades of what the civil society wants to achieve, what Ukrainians need, and this will definitely help in the endeavors of these days, but also in the future. And I thank you very, very much for coming, and already when you have to go back, safe travels, take good care of you and of your families. We hope we can contribute in this, and fruitful discussions I wish you for these days ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much, Aaron. Oh, I can see that my microphone is now working from here, but I mean, we are here today to talk about integrity, and I think the word integrity means whole. And that wholeness comes from engagement of citizens, government, community-based organizations, business, and I know there's also a big business hub here in Lugano. because Ukraine as a whole now stands against the aggressor. And I think that joint feeling of what it takes when the nation is able to achieve when it's whole together should be carried on somehow. And it's not an easy answer how this could be carried on while preserving very vibrant democracy. Because this is why Ukraine is winning the war, is because it is democracy. Like Finland was winning against the USSR because it was democracy. And here I think there's something about learning from that roots of democracy that, that makes countries resilient. So I'd like to invite our panel to take seats here, to take a deeper dive into international engagement in the recovery process and accountability. What does it take to make recovery a success? So Minister Alexei Chernyshov, could you please take a seat? He's the Minister for Communities and Territorial Development of Ukraine. Maciej Popovsky, Acting Director at the DG NEAR and Engagement Negotiation and Enlargement Negotiations at the European Commission. Erin McKee, who is Ambassador at the Usaid Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia. Welcome, Erin. Valery Pekar, who is co-founder of Civic platform Nova Krajina. Hanna Hopko, Chair of the Board National Interest Advocacy Network, and also Platform for Ukraine's Victory. I know they've set it up in Warsaw. And last but not least, a Member of Parliament, Anastasia Radina, who is the chairperson at the Parliamentary Committee on Corruption Prevention. So we have quite an integral panel to discuss accountability that I'm sure you'll hear various views on it. And I would like to kick us off to ask Minister, of course, we do know that the challenges of recovery comes in quality and speed. Ukrainians still have to boost up the home front while Russian war is waging in the east of Ukraine. And Minister, you are also overseeing something that gives Ukraine that strength, which is communities, decentralized governance, where Ukrainians own the process, where they feel that they have a stake in it. So how do you see the challenges and some of the solutions maybe? How can civil society and business, non-state actors, can be involved in recovery that we will all win in the end? Can this be a win-win?
Yes, absolutely. Very good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome all the familiar faces here. And I believe that we are having a tremendous and extraordinary event, first time during the course of this war. And I am happy to start the conference, especially from this event. It is being called Social Society Side Event, but nevertheless, and given the fact that government and civil society try to separate from each other, I'm very happy to state that during the wartime and martial law, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian business, and the civil society go hand in hand towards our victory. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I have mentioned that some of the audience was reacting, some part of the Ukrainian audience was somehow reflecting on the sound of thunder, which we were experiencing from outside. And I think this is a fact of our recent experience that we have used in Ukraine. Happily, this is only rain that is falling on our heads outside, not the rockets, not the shells, not the bombs, which is currently still going on in our beloved country. Of course, we are here to discuss the recovery. It is very important to realize that Ukrainian recovery might be conditional to several factors. And from the very beginning, I would like to state, being in this audience, that structural reforms, rule of law, anti-corruption, and judicial reform might be the main factor for upcoming recovery. I would like to start, with your permission. It might take a little bit longer that you would, but please forgive me. For us to synchronize, I would like you to see the map of Ukraine. Being the Minister of Regional Development, should show maps, you know. And I'm happy to show the map, not the map of the invasion, but the map of the current organization of power and of the way the municipalities and regions are governed. So once again, I would like to inform that Ukraine is a decentralized country. Decentralization reform played a very important role after 2014. And I think decentralization brought a lot of resilience to Ukrainian gromadas, to Ukrainian communities with the fight for the Russian aggression. So in this map, you can see 4 types of the regions that we are currently living in. So group number one is a frontline region. These are the regions where we have practical war. So the military things, the military issues, and the evacuation, food supply, military supply, transportation, logistics. So it's a life or death question. You can see the group number 2, which is central part and which is the support regions, which do support the whole country. And they might be under attack, depending on our success on the front line. Then we have group number 4 on the north that used to be occupied on a certain stage of the war, and luckily, due to the resilience of Ukrainian people and extreme role of Ukrainian army, these regions are deoccupied right now, and we are concentrated on the initial recovery, on the emergency things we should do in these regions. And of course, the group number 3, the backline regions, so there are 8 oblasts of Ukraine which experience a very outstanding situation, bringing more people, more IDPs, more consumption, more business, more population, and in some areas we witness the GDP growth. We witness the growth of business. So it's an extraordinary situation. I wouldn't like you to understand that we have 4 different types of the country, but we have definitely 4 different regions. This map shows us that recovery is important. Even now, we are not in a position to wait before the war is over. We should provide the emergency recovery to the places where it's possible, especially to the deoccupied regions. Also, the front line, we are heading the so-called heating season, and the proximity of the coming winter requires us to be prepared for the resource, to be prepared with natural gas. We should fix the central heating stations, the electric stations that have been severely damaged, and some of them were destroyed. And we are in a position to do that. We do everything possible for that. And we should all understand that Ukrainian recovery will have 3 main stages. Stage number 1, that should happen during the wartime, during the martial law, and we should prepare our country. Stage number 2, once the war is over, hopefully very soon, we should provide the basic infrastructure and the basic services for our people. And stage number 3, famous Marshall Plan. You know, every second person right now on the street of Kiev is discussing Marshall Plan. I think most of the people in Lugano today, especially from the guests of the conference, they see themselves as part of the Marshall Plan. The trick is, the Marshall Plan is coming only after the second stage is over. Another thing, the Marshall Plan, we are talking about tens of billions of dollars, even more. These amounts are only available and conditional to structural reforms. No one will finance Ukraine once it's not reconstructed. And it's not about the infrastructure reconstruction. It's about the civil society.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just don't want us to turn into a bit of a one-voice panel. Apologies, with all due respect. But I agree with you. But my question would be, again, because we are talking about this inclusion and integrity, under the condition of martial law today, as you're describing us challenges in these regions, and I agree with you that to get to a Marshall Plan, we still need so much to do, and there is a whole phase that we are perhaps for wishful thinking, because we all need hope and wishful thinking. What do you want to tell now, civil society organizations, how can they engage now? Tomorrow when they come back to Ukraine, should they go to their mayors? Is it all about local level? Should you set up something at the ministry? How do you see this happening? Some action, can you give a few action points for people, if you may?
Yeah, thank you. Once again, I'm sorry for unexpected longer time of the speech.
Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, so let's have a conversation. So first of all, I think all of us should understand that recovery consists of three things, which is physical, economy, and reforms. I think that 99% of Ukrainian population, and possibly government, is mainly concentrated on physical recovery, which might be secondary once we fail once again to deliver the reforms agenda on the table. And I think that is the audience, and that is the idea of this panel, to once again take a look at that and say we should be concentrated on the reforms agenda. And that is why, once we are back in Ukraine, the civil society, which I consider myself to be a part of, regardless that we are distinct from each other, we should be united, and we should go ahead hand in hand and to deliver all the structural reforms required. We cannot allow ourselves another decade of the failure that we have experienced over the last 30 years. Let's put it open. No one wants to be a failed nation. We all want to be a successful nation. And that is why I would like to emphasize the reform agenda is crucial. We all should be concentrated on that. And I'm really happy that the current civil society audience in Ukraine is definitely tackling and pushing Ukrainian government. We should push together stronger and be united.
Well, thank you very much. And, I was surprised to hear so much emphasis on reform, given a certain fatigue, you could say, and the internal discussion that we hear, some, including members of parliament, saying, well, Ukraine has reformed enough, let's move on. But I agree with you. I think it's a question of what kind of emphasis we are putting on. And here we have Maciej from the European Union, and I think it has been a historic week when Ukraine has finally received the EU candidate status. Something that I think really gives Ukraine a guiding light and a concrete walking, support along those lines. And Maciej, how do you see this EU candidate status? How will it support those structural reforms that Minister was talking about? And where do you see civil society being part of it?
Thank you very much. I don't like using lofty words, but this was really a historic decision, something that was difficult to imagine 4 months ago, because Ukraine has been fighting for this candidate status for quite a while, but there was simply no consensus, and then things have changed. But it was not only because of the war, but it was because of things that have happened in the country, and it's a different country. It's been changing constantly since 2014, and there have been many undesired side effects of Putin's aggression. Strengthening of NATO, strengthening of European unity, but also this incredible stress test of the Ukrainian statehood and the Ukrainian people and society. And we really did our best to have it reflected in our opinion and recommendation to the member states to grant candidate status to Ukraine. When you read through it, and it's rather short and solid, you can see that the strength was the resilience of the institutions, public institutions, all levels, government, parliament, municipalities, hramadas, etc., etc. They've all stood this stress test and delivered, continued delivering for the people. So this is the basis. Of course, you still need to do a lot to reform the economy and to improve the rule of law and the judiciary. And then we listed the whole, just a number of important reforms that need to be tackled as a matter of priority. But the direction of travel is clear. Of course, candidate status comes with certain obligations. The way we formulated that in our opinion was that Ukraine should become a candidate country now, on the understanding that a number of steps are taken. So it's not triggering, you don't need to wait, but there are still a couple of things that need to be done, and this is already happening, and some of the reforms are being enacted in record time. And we admire that a lot, but of course it's a long way to go, and we will stand by Ukraine, by the government, but also by the civil society, giving them a hand. Another little miracle of the war situation was that when the war started, we realized that most of our civil society partners, and it's a lot of them, were operating normally, also in places that were literally under fire. So we want them to come along and be part of this huge reconstruction effort. And of course, the minister rightly described the process. It will not happen overnight. On the other hand, we don't have the luxury to wait. So wherever you can start doing something, you should do that, and we'll be there to help. So one of the programs that are coming on stream now, following the pledges made by President von der Leyen at the Warsaw conferences in April and in May, is to help early returns and to focus on the internally displaced people, help them with housing, for instance. So the funding that we will release still before the summer, so by the end of this month, will be targeting exactly that policy area. And then there is more to come once we have a clear understanding on the way the reconstruction is going to happen. One thing has to be said very clearly: it's for the Ukrainians to decide how they want to do it. I mean, we aren't going to prescribe it from Brussels. We'll be happy to co-lead the effort, and that was what was discussed and agreed between our presidents. So whatever we set up, we call it Ukraine Reconstruction Platform, and this is going to be discussed today and tomorrow. We are ready to co-manage that, but it has to be owned by the Ukrainian government, by the president, by the Ukrainian civil society. And our idea is to create enough space for everyone, not only for ourselves and government and for our member states and other donors like US or Japan or the development banks, the World Bank and others, but also for business, for civil society and the parliaments. Yeah. I know it may sound huge, but I think we have to be inclusive. And I read the Lugano Declaration that was prepared by a number of organizations, and I fully agree with the message. You know, they want to be sure that they will be there to provide for accountability and transparency on the process. We'll be managing huge sums of money, public money most of the time, and it's fair enough for the civil society to demand that they have a say on it. So that's what we would like to grant. It's also reassuring to our own member states and our parliament that is keeping a close eye on our spending. And this principle that was mentioned in the beginning, to keep a close link between reform and reconstruction, is key for us. It's key for President von der Leyen, because we see this reconstruction process also as an opportunity to speed up reforms. And these reforms would need to be done anyway, whether Ukraine was a candidate country or not. But if it is, it can be faster. We can incentivize it. We can provide technical assistance. We can provide additional financial support, because we're also going to set up, and that was announced back in May, a specific tool. We call it Ukraine Reconstruction Facility, a new financial tool to work on reconstruction. I don't want to put a number on it because it's way too early and the numbers are mind-boggling for the time being. But we have to be ready, and we will do it without delay.
So it's good, from what I understand, is that there is a openness and willingness to create the space for different partners to engage. I guess perhaps, as all conferences, we confer to come with some action points, because what's the point of being here, right? I mean, to be honest, I think it would be great perhaps if you hear some ideas also from Ukraine, in addition to some of the principles. And, there's another document of principles that I'm holding that was built based on the conference last week in Kyiv, organized by EU-Ukraine Anti-Corruption Initiative, that talks about bottom-up deep accountability, for example, as a principle, but how do you instrumentalize this principle? So perhaps something to think about today with the specific mechanisms about how create the space that Mati was talking about to ensure the facility is inclusive, that it responds to Ukrainian needs, and that we have accountability. But I would like to now really bring in the representatives of USAID, and I think Erin is here to talk a little bit about how U.S. Embassy, U.S. government, and the agency sees it. And I'm glad that it's a real transatlantic conversation, because at this stage, to be honest, much of assistance that was given both militarily and budgetary support came from the United States, although Ukraine, of course, has a very strong ambition with the EU, but it would be, paramount, I think, that the international partners of that magnitude cooperate. And I would like to hear a bit from Erin how she sees how Ukraine can make this breakthrough leapfrog into a bright and new future.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you today. I've been on the job as Assistant Administrator for Europe and Eurasia for my agency now for just about 2 months, and about 18 hours of every day is spent on Ukraine. The other 4 hours are spent on the rest of the region. But I want to start there and what my colleagues have shared, and that is that Ukraine's recovery must be owned and driven by Ukraine. Ukrainians will rebuild Ukraine, and following Ukraine's lead will be the guiding principle for the United States of America through USAID, particularly in terms of recovery, resilience, and ensuring that the path forward, leapfrogging or catalyzing, as you said, endures. Dedicated civil society leaders like all of you here today are going to be vital to ensuring the success not only of USAID's efforts, but of the collective efforts of the entire international community. You've heard reference to anti-corruption and the importance of shining a light and ensuring that the confidence in Ukraine for Ukrainians endures. And that means that not only on the government side, in terms of advancing and catalyzing the reform agenda as we rebuild, but for civil society in particular to feed into that narrative and help shore up that confidence and call on government, international partners, when things need to be changed, when we can accelerate, when we can catalyze, or if the work that we're doing is not taking into account what Ukrainians need and want on the ground. Putin's war has brought stark clarity to how the United States sees Ukraine and the wider region. It has not only convinced us to make additional resources available, as you mentioned, we're, as of right now, the largest supporter, and that shows bipartisan, congressional, executive, and frankly, on the part of the American people, commitment to ensuring that Ukraine not only succeeds, but becomes that beacon of light, that bright spot in Europe and Eurasia in withstanding and holding up democracy. I'm going to throw out a number, more than 10 billion US from the United States alone, the largest assistance program to date since the Marshall Plan. And we keep talking about the Marshall Plan, but I think that that is an out-of-time concept right now, because remember, the Marshall Plan came on board after the war was over. And what we're talking about, as you showed us, Minister, in particular, that we are looking at relief in real time, recovery in certain areas, and reconstruction, or deepening the anchors of democracy and stability within a country at the same time. That's very complex, it's challenging, and what it demands of all of us is to be flexible, resilient, and measured, because while America stands with and by Ukraine, our ability to sustain this support is going to have to be delivered over and over again. And the opportunity of the confidence in Ukraine to stay the course, to keep going with the reform agenda, to accelerate the path to EU accession, and to be able to, as President Biden would characterize, build back better where we can, is going to be necessary in the moment, so that the confidence that we have in the support that we provide also endures. Our objectives from USAID's side in supporting Ukraine's recovery, I'm going to summarize it in what I call our 3 C's. First is catalyze. USAID will help to catalyze Ukraine's growth and trajectory on the reform agenda to be an independent, democratic, prosperous, and resilient country in line with Ukraine's aspirations. We want to consolidate, the second C, and that is enable Ukraine to consolidate the gains the country has made in partnership with the United States, the European Union, and all of the like-minded partners. And thirdly, connect. We will help connect Ukraine citizens to each other, to the government, and this is where all of you in this room play a vital role, as well as to the countries, other countries in the region, to markets, to investors, and to partners who are committed to your success. The United States of America, the EU, and frankly, the government of Ukraine cannot do this alone. We are going to have to mobilize and boost the confidence of investors, the private sector, other like-minded actors, to be able to shore up and sustain the path to recovery and reconstruction that we see ahead of us. Following the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, USAID prioritized partnering directly with Ukrainian civil society, because we saw that we can't only work with the government, we had to make sure that every voice in Ukraine was heard as part of that response to the first invasion. And so from whether it's watchdogs or amplifying the voice of citizenry on the ground, that partnership is vital, and even more vital today than it has ever been. So in supporting your recovery, that approach will not waver. And I know that I have a lot of talking points, but
I'll have to interrupt everybody so that nobody take back at me after the end of the panel. So.
But I just want to end with one element that we've all touched upon that is critical here, and that is the commitment to anti-corruption, transparency, and accountability. The faith in the Ukrainian government and the path to recovery and reconstruction has to be ironclad for the American people to continue to support that faith in Ukraine's dedication to reform, accelerating EU accession, and ensuring, as I said, sort of consolidating, connecting cannot happen if we don't have absolute transparency, accountability, and reflection of all of Ukraine as we head down this path. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron, I think it's fantastic, and we've heard both from you and from Matej about the really appeal for Ukraine's agency, recognition of Ukraine's agency, because what is happening now on the ground, it's Ukrainians are delivering it, and almost 80% of citizens are engaged one way or the other in the war effort. And that, I think, is, that's why Ukraine is a success. But another thing is that about this sustainability of commitment, and this sustainability, I'm sure, will be there if Ukraine will be viewed as a success. And that success means, on one hand, containing Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also delivering recovery in a speedy way, effective way, high-quality way, so that the donors and taxpayers will see that this is working well. Be as successful as Ukraine, not just be brave as Ukraine. At this point, you see all over European cities, be brave like Ukraine. And I think there has to be a next step now. Be successful, innovative as Ukraine at times of war. And, to be honest, we are heading in an age of turbulence, and there will be a lot of this resilience needed, not just for Ukraine, but for the societies in the European Union and in the United States. So it's fascinating, and I think it's a good transition to Ukraine's agency to invite Valery Pekar, because he represents that Ukrainian civil society business community that is already talking about what it is that they would like to see from recovery. And being a true provocative thinker, Valery would like to talk about the pitfalls of recovery, what it is that we should be aware, what are the dangers that we must avoid at all costs today. Valery.
Thank you, Orisa. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to highlight three major pitfalls of recovery process. First is the stretch between ownership and transparency, because Ukrainian side would like to declare as much Ukrainian ownership of the process as possible, which for some Europeans and Americans sounds like, please give us money and don't ask for anything. And some Westerners would like to see as much transparency as possible, which for some Ukrainians sounds like we should create an office in Warsaw or somewhere in Vilnius, and some Americans and Europeans will sign all checks there, which is unacceptable for Ukrainian side because of no ownership and no Ukrainian vision and strategy and interest will be implemented. So this is a dialogue, and in extreme if both parties will have extreme positions, at the end of the day, this will be a dialogue of an automatic pilot system and automatic answering machine. So what to do? How to solve this problem? We need to add one more dimension. So we need third point. We need a triangle, which already was mentioned by Olena Pavlenko. We need third subject, third agent in this sphere, civil society. Another second pitfall is that we have three processes to do simultaneously. Rebuilding, so building back everything destroyed. European integration, it's clear, and modernization, which means bringing the country to the next level of development. Those three processes are simultaneous and they contradict each other. Like in old joke from business school stories, cases, our hospital provides you with the care and which is cheap, high quality, and fast. You can choose two or three, any two or three. You cannot afford to have three at all. So what to do? Just an example. European integration means correct, right decisions. Rebuilding means fast and cheap solutions. Modernization means sustainability, which is not cheap indeed and fast. So we cannot afford three of all at the same time. So what we need, again, one more dimension to add one more point, which is civil society. I use here civil society in a very, very wide meaning, which is not only institutionalized NGOs, but also volunteers, local businesses, even local authorities, think tanks, universities, business communities, and many, many other groups which could have united voice and could contribute. And third pitfall is execution. We are speaking a lot about corruption, to be frank, but we have no money for the moment because we have no capacity to execute all those. Who will pack all those projects? Who will manage all those projects? We need dozens of thousands of project managers, first of all, at local level. How to engage them? Where to find all of them? The public sector has no such capacity. So again, we need a capacity which could be brought together only from the civil society in a very wide meaning, including local businesses and so on. So those three major pitfalls and the same answer. We need here the third agent, not only Ukrainian authorities which represent the whole nation, not only Western organizations which represent international support and assistance and competences, but also who will execute all of this. So this is three different pitfalls, one answer for all three of that. So that means that we need civil society not as a watchdog. Mm-hmm. We need in Ukrainian realities, you know this, civil society is a sledgedog, simply doing all those things by our hands and our brains. So we have brought several documents here to Lugano conference. First of all, the so-called Lugano Declaration or Lugano Manifest, which already was mentioned. The Declaration of Principles of Transparency, of Inclusivity, and some other document is available, it's short. Another one is a very long document. It's a provocative document entitled Ukraine After the Victory. And my colleagues will distribute QR codes to access this document. This is a united effort of some 40 think tanks and expert NGOs to provide answers to three questions. what is our vision of Ukraine in 2030, how to reach this, and what red lines we couldn't step over. And many other things which we brought here to Lugano conference platform to provoke this dialogue and to create this triangle. Again, we should emphasize this triangle of international organizations and Western governments, Ukrainian authorities, and Ukrainian civil society in a very wide sense, including local businesses, communities, universities, and many other actors. This is our answer to many, many questions how to afford, how to manage all those processes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valery. When you were talking about the second pitfall and the tensions between rebuilding EU integration and modernization, I would put another point on top, which is institutions, because I think they can bring in and reconcile these things together, because Ukraine needs to have the problem of the last kilometer, as Yaroslav Hricak talks about it, about modernization is institutions, and EU can help in that. But I think perhaps with all these documents that are circulated around, it would be great to have a Kiev declaration where there is an agreement of some sorts between Ukrainian civil society and Ukrainian government in how they're going to approach, how they will approach recovery, and how jointly could there be some social contract about it. Perhaps when you're back from the conference, there could be some discussion. And now I would like to bring Hanna Hopko. We hear a lot about this bottom-up push, the actual involvement of civil society, but what is the cutting edge of civil society? What it is that it really, what is the added value in this particular moment of Ukraine's history? How you see it? You've been at the forefront of Ukraine reanimation package of reform, for example. At that time, you saw this is what Ukraine needs. What's next on Ukraine's civil society journey in recovery?
Thank you, Orisa, honorable guest participants. So let me start from expressing my gratitude to all our international partners, donors, and international community for being with us. And the host, and of course today, and when we are also joining with greetings to the American nation celebrating the 1st of July. Also, I think it's really important to see, like we've seen Rammstein coalition leading with the US, a second wider than Rammstein coalition to help Ukraine to rebuild back better. And I would like to wish the coalition of more than 140 countries which adopted the UN resolution when the full-scale escalation started, and in UN there was big resolution. So I think the success of Ukraine is geopolitically important for the whole world, because Ukraine victory is a powerful signal to authoritarian regime in Indo-Pacific region. Also, Ukraine victory is a part of window of opportunity for Moldova, Georgia, and Belarus. So this is why, let me start from geopolitics, because trust matters, and the more we receive from our partners, especially weapons, because all our activists, they became experts in javelins, HIMARS, NASAMS, Abrams, Leopards, and all heavy artillery, because the more and faster we receive heavy artillery, the safer world will become from devastation, which will stop at Ukrainian territory and not moving beyond. So I understand that probably it's not the right time to talk about weapons, but faster Ukrainian victory, faster we will start our reconstruction. So this is first message. Second, it's about trust. Among the key components of trust, of course, is transparency and accountability. And as Orisa mentioned, after the Euromaidan, we established the reanimation package of reforms, and together with the best, the most reputable civil society, we were trying to change the system. Probably we were not successful because we couldn't avoid, together with the government, the full-scale war, and together with international community, because the success would have been happen if we could prevent the full-scale war, genocidal war in the 21st century. So I think it's really important by now preparing the recovery, reconstruction, rebuilding plan, because it's another powerful signal to totalitarian regime. But coming back to the role of civil society, from March, when we established the International Center for Ukrainian Victory together with Anti-Corruption Action Center and Opora, we are contributing a lot to Ukrainian victory, from weapon, from sanctions, including Kirill, and I wish to see more tougher action in Ukraine against the Russian Orthodox Church, and thanks to UK for imposing sanctions against Kirill, and also candidate status. So we joined as a part of national team to the governmental efforts, and I'm very thankful to the EU representative for this. Also, I would say a geopolitical decision, because Ukraine is not considered anymore as a buffer zone. It's now, and I hope in the future, member of the EU. But now our key mission is to monitor the political leadership of our country, the implementation of statements. And what I would like to see, the faster appointment of head of special anti-corruption prosecutor. And actually, I don't understand what is the reason why country still hasn't appointed this, because I think it's key. Also, if we are talking about trust, we are talking about billions or even trillion to rebuild our country. So trust is key. So these 7 important criteria, we will, since we contributed a lot, that country received candidate status, now the civil society will contribute a lot to implement the roadmap and actually to prepare for next stages and to become a membership of the EU. And also, what is really important, I will not focus on Marshall Plan, because in this audience, people remember 2017, 2019 being head of the Foreign Affairs Committee with Lithuanian delegation, 2 prime ministers. We were advocating Marshall Plan at that time. Some people were very skeptical, saying like, why they are advocating Marshall Plan for Ukraine? So with Andrius Kubilius, who is now a member of European Parliament and special rapporteur on Russia, we are also discussing about recovery plan. But why? Recovery plan with successful decentralization reform and inclusiveness and engagement of mayors. This is a powerful message to, or this is a part of our strategy, how to de-imperialize Russian Federation. Because decentralization reform with destroyed vertical power, this is something what in Russia we see this when Moscow is grabbing the natural resources from Tatarstan, Yakutia, and others. So for us, decentralization reform and engagement of mayors is key. And of course, I would like to see in this room, mayor of Chernihiv. Where is mayor of Chernihiv? Where is mayor of Mykolaiv city? So I think this is really important to see these mayors, because it's great that our minister just showed us a picture with 4 like frontline regions, support regions, and Chernihiv region like a deoccupied region. When we visited Washington, D.C. just recently, and we had a productive meeting with Erin, and we had with us the secretary of Chernihiv City Council. And he was the one who mentioned all the problems that Chernihiv city is now facing, preparing to the winter season. So I think this is important, that representatives of communities, they are taking ownership and telling about their problems. I see the mayor of Lviv over there, he just entered the back of the room. We were just talking about mayors. Welcome. So, and why?
So we have at least one mayor here, Hannah. Well, that's great. You saved the conference, you know, thanks very much.
But I think still, with all love we have to Lviv, and I'm from Lviv, but actually Ukraine and all regions is not just Lviv. I think Poltava, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, and all donors also have to refocus their visits and pay attention to Volyn, Lutsk, and others, which is really important. And let me finish. So why the visits of mayors to different European cities is so important. For example, Rotterdam, which was destroyed after the World War II. So now I think the wonderful ideas how to rebuild Mariupol could come from Rotterdam and other cities. So I think, and even Warsaw also, so there could be many powerful examples. But my message is the ownership, of course, Ukraine's state, national level, key strategic sectors, space industry, defense industry, and others. But ownership at the local level should go from local leaders, mayors. And I do hope at the next conference, or USAID with JICA and other foreign partners, they will organize conference inviting mayor first, and they will navigate how they should go, not just, because I think we have to build a synergy between the national government and local communities, and the destroyed vertical power we used to have after Euromaidan should not be back. Because we are talking about building back better, not worse.
I think you're almost making a perfect transition to the second panel, which will discuss exactly how can the dialogue with the national and regional government be maintained. And this is a big question and another pitfall that I would add to Valerie's list. How do you reconcile between the recovery that is locally driven and the national development plan where all these local recoveries really fit into a coherent economy? Because Ukraine must remain a competitive global economy, not just one successful region of Chernihiv. So that is another tension that I think requires exactly this dialogue. And I was told by conference organizers that unfortunately the mayor of Mykolaiv en route here could not come because of the problems. He was supposed also to be here. So jokes aside, I think this particular side event is trying to put a lot of highlight and emphasis on local actors and those who are receiving medals from President Zelensky for their bravery defending Ukraine at times of war. So partially it's also mayor's war, and we commend their bravery on their daily duties to provide for their communities. But last but not least, we'll, if the organizers permit, run 5 minutes over the panel because we started a bit late. But I want to bring in Anastasia. Recovery will be a political process. That's another challenge where there will be different parties also having different views about what is just, what is not just, what should be the level of taxation. But I think that all political parties would agree on one principle, that there should be a very strong integrity measures embedded, anti-corruption measures embedded. So it would be great to hear from you what specific anti-corruption measures you see that could guarantee and ensure integrity of the reconstruction process. Anastasia.
Thank you so much, Orisia. I will try to limit myself to a few highlights, basically. First, we are actually in a very good standing in terms of a baseline for a recovery process. Why? We have a functioning state, which is something very few countries in a war basically managed to demonstrate. Second, we actually have I would say, one of the most sophisticated anti-corruption infrastructures, anti-corruption frameworks in the world. Now, country is very different from what it used to be in 2014, for example. We are now in a country where anti-corruption institutions actually started to deliver, demonstrating justice, putting corrupt people, corrupt judges especially, behind bars, and actually recovering stolen assets for the benefit of Ukrainian budget, which means for the benefit of all the people of Ukraine. And last but not least, we have a vibrant civil society which has a 10-year-old tradition of giving a headache to many politicians, and luckily so. These are very important pillars for recovery, which we already have, which is, again, something not, I would say quite few, if any, countries in the war were ever able to demonstrate. At the same time, we are in a very bad standing in terms of the scope of destruction. We have at least 800,000 people who have lost their homes. We have at least 25% of railroad infrastructure destroyed. We have at least 100 billion of damage done to state infrastructure, and these are just preliminary numbers. So what does that mean? First, there is no improper time to talk about HIMARSes in a situation where we are now, because more HIMARSes with longer range missiles, which is something we are not yet getting, is a basically way to have less destruction and therefore to need less money for reconstruction. This is basic, therefore, again, no wrong time to talk about heavy weaponry supply to Ukraine. But second, this scope of destruction also means that we will need to have an unprecedented amount of investment, both from state actors, from donor countries, and from private enterprises. So what do we do in order to make sure that Ukraine as a country is sexy for the investment and is able to accumulate this investment and to make it pay off in a transparent and socially beneficial way? Well, frankly, there are not that many, very fresh solutions. There are not that many things we have not been talking and working on already. What we need to do is first continue strengthening anti-corruption institutions and continue doing judicial reform. I'm happy to say we are in the midst of judicial reform right now, despite war and combat happening in one-fifth of the country. Still in Kiev, we are working on integrity on the judiciary. I cannot agree more with Hanna that it is high time to basically have some very important appointments done, including head of Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. And let me assure you that this is taken very seriously on a high political level. We are very much committed to continue working on these reforms in the framework outlined in the recommendations of European Commission, and hopefully soon within the framework of membership plan, to which I hope we will be able to move soon after respective recommendations are implemented. Second, again, not new, but something we Ukrainians do quite well, I would say, is implementing all possible digital solutions to make sure there is no discretion for public officials, and to make sure there is basically no space of corruption. There is nothing to investigate and prevent, because corruption simply doesn't happen due to digital solutions. And here we have a long and very, I would say, very, again, sophisticated list of solutions, starting with award-winning ProZorro system, which does not need advertising anymore, I think, and continuing with all the opportunities DIA platform is offering, and moving forward to all the digital solutions to make sure, for example, construction licenses or whatever area that might be corruption-prone is actually let's say, transformed into transparent digital mechanism. Then, of course, there should be transparency in order for civil society I referred to earlier to continue giving a headache to all kinds of politicians and public officials, because, well, colleagues, this is what worked. In the meantime, I would say we will be very happy to work together with both private donors and donor countries on introducing joint oversight mechanisms with, again, donors, with public officials, with international experts, and with civil society, to make sure that there is due level of trust in investment into Ukraine, and to make sure that the question of misappropriation of resources never even raises on the agenda, in order not to hamper and not to endanger the inflow of investment into the country. I think these are key things to work on. Sorry that there are few things we haven't talked before, but I think this is also a good sign that we are already on a good standing and already doing our homework to make sure we will be able and already are able to cope with that investment, and to attract this investment, and to cope with that investment in a transparent way and for the benefit of people of Ukraine.
Well, it's interesting because in one of the sessions we held also with the US anti-corruption program, Anasiaka sitting over there behind the closed doors, so I will not attribute the source, but the investor said from the West that really to make Ukraine attractive, you need to modernize, apply this digital technology to tax collection, to customs, because that's a big area of modernization that holds back Ukraine from, on top of political risk, you add that hurdle that some of the investors have to go through, and that suddenly becomes much less attractive. But speaking of business, I think the civil society should not only give headache to government, and here I would like to come to defense of a government, and also give headache to business. Because why are we only assuming that corruption will come from government officials? It could come from companies, and here one of the, again, in one sentence says, demand higher standards of business integrity and compliance from local business, so that they can be trusted by both Ukrainian citizens and international partners. So you see there's a way scope, and I hope some of you will go to the Business Hub after our kickoff event and speak what we are talking here today. But wow, what a fantastic discussion. I think it really kicked us off to be ready to talk to government, to be ready to talk to business, and I know we must wrap up, and I'm really sorry we cannot bring in the audience, but I was given this time and this amazing panel. I could not give more other than suggest that you speak during the coffee break, which will happen not now. So first, I would like to ask you all join in the round of applause to thank our speakers. You know, for being honest, for bearing my interruption, but I really wanted to take as much as possible from them. And I would like now to ask you to take seats in the first row and invite the economists that will present the reform tracker. That was a specific project done for the Lugano conference to give us back on track with reforms, I guess, to direct our to-do list when we come back to Kyiv. So over to you. Thank you. Standing like in the church. Як службу Божу відстояла.
Okay. Sorry. Hello? Yeah, there is like a lot of... Hello?
Can somebody help with the sound, the technician with the sound?
Sorry. Always technology, eh? Hello? Hello? Sorry, the mic doesn't seem to... Which one? Is it this one? Hello? Can you hear me now? Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's nothing better than a bit of a technological issues to start the presentation, and especially, you know, following such a distinguished and really, really insightful conversation. So I'll try to be very concise and very brief, so we will not hold you to long from your coffee break. But just a quick introduction. My name is Matt Samel. I'm a senior research manager from Economist Impact, based in London, which is a research arm of the Economist magazine. And we work with partners around the world, focusing on particularly long-term economic development. So we have partnered with SDC and the Ukraine Recovery Conference to really try to look at the sort of future and the importance of the reform agenda within the broader recovery of the country. And so thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and thank you so much for the organizers of this fantastic event. So just a sort of very quick introduction, and I think that we heard it all from the opening remarks and from the amazing panel just before. But the reason why we as the sort of economists are looking at this issue is that based on our understanding and our analysis and our experience when it comes to the transition economy, but also post-conflict recovery, and the fundamental structural reforms in key areas are absolutely vital for long-term prosperity and long-term development. So we have developed what we call Ukraine Reform Tracker. which is a tool that basically aims to provide an overview of the progress in terms of challenges and opportunities in the key reform areas for the country. This is to inform and really provide some data, some framework for assessment to support the policy dialogue today, but especially going forward, that we agree that absolutely needs to be owned by the Ukrainians. And we are trying to provide a framework, a common language almost, and some common sense of measurements and the data that can facilitate this policy dialogue. And we do so by looking at 4 key areas: economic reform, energy and environment reform, social reform, and governance reform that are absolutely vital and underpin the long-term recovery. And we are trying to assess 3 areas within each of these areas for reform. And these are, firstly, the progress that has been achieved in this reform area since 2014. Secondly, we're trying to look at the resilience that this area showed in 2022 during the conflict, of course, with the caveat that we can only assess the situation as it is of today, and the situation is changing daily. But we understand, and we really want to highlight that the reform areas and progress in those areas really are showcased in some of the developments during the conflict already. And finally, we want to look at the future, the outlook in these reform areas based on the progress today and based on the performance that we have seen over the last few months, and really try to understand where are the key challenges, where are the key opportunities going forward. So just very quickly, this is just a repetition. We're looking at progress since 2014, resilience into 2022, and outlook in the immediate future. We are looking, as I mentioned, in 4 broad areas, and I will run through these fairly quickly. But there is a so this presentation is only really a summary, high-level summary of these 4 areas, so economic, energy, environment, social, and governance. Within each, we have 3 areas that we will go through very quickly. But there is a a report with full details that you can find online, but also a few printed copies outside. So please do look for the details in those. So, as mentioned, we have seen in all of these 4 areas that there has been a lot of progress, but there are a lot of challenges remaining, and we do believe that further progress and further development within these areas, within these reform areas, are absolutely vital for a long-term recovery and long-term sustainable recovery. And the implementation of these reform efforts will be absolutely vital and critical over the next few years. So I'll just run you through the first 2 pillars, so economic and environmental, and then I will hand over to my colleague Ed for the social and the critical governance element. So firstly, we looked at, within the economic reform area, we look at the business environment. We've seen that there has been a lot of improvement in terms of protection and operational ease for private enterprises in Ukraine since 2014. And there's been achieved a lot, particularly through enhanced power and operations of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. We have seen a lot of improvements in terms of eliminating red tape, improved licensing, as well as improved and streamlined taxation regime and processes. However, although there has been some progress on improvement in procurement, as well as privatization, these areas, including broader competition in the key sectors and subsectors are still challenging, and we do see them as very, very important going forward for a sort of broad-based economic recovery. And this includes areas that are of vital importance, such as energy, agriculture, light industry, chemicals, or, of course, technology. Secondly, we looked at the financial sector development, and we have seen a lot of progress since 2014. A lot of this has been concentrated around the changes and the overhaul of the National Bank of Ukraine that has allowed for a liberalization of the currency, floated exchange rates, redirected monetary policy, but crucially for improved processes for regulation of the sector that contributed to improve performance when it comes to non-performing loans in the banking system. However, we have seen that some of the restrictions put in place, although understandably when it comes to currency, financial and capital controls, are really potentially going forward prohibitive, and we would want to see them sort of removed following the conflict as soon as possible. But crucially, and this is the vital point, is that improved push for transparency, competition, and oversight within the sector will be really important for generating and attracting and especially allocating capital that will be much needed in the post-war recovery. And finally, within the economic pillar, we looked at foreign trade. Obviously, this has been a sort of vital one of the key priorities, and there has been a lot of progress that we have seen, but particularly in terms of removing excess regulation, simplifying import tariffs, and of course, crucially, improving harmonization with key trade partners, particularly the European Union. We have seen a lot of progress done on diversification of the export portfolio, both geographically and in terms of the product portfolio, which is really encouraging. However, we have seen also that the trade has been one area that has understandably been hit extremely hard by the invasion. And we have seen that the reliance and on particularly concentrated channels of exports, whether it comes to particularly the maritime routes and ports, has been one of the sources of key challenges. And therefore, the rebuilding and expansion of alternative channels will be a really, really important part, an aspect going forward. Including, or on the top of that, we have also seen that a sort of more coordinated national export strategy and improvements in terms of particularly non-tariff barriers will be a very important strategy going forward. Secondly, turning to energy and environment, the first area that we looked at is green transition. This is an area where we have seen quite a lot of progress in Ukraine since 2014, particularly in the areas of renewable, including renewable sources into the national energy systems. However, this has started from a very low base, so there is a lot of room for improvement. We have also seen progress in decreasing carbon intensity of the economy overall. However, we still see the economy is highly dependent, remains highly dependent on fossil fuels, and particularly from imported sources. And this has been one of the key areas of vulnerability during the conflict as well. So going forward, also a lot of the encouraging efforts that we have seen, whether it comes to emission-related legislation or energy transition strategies, a lot of this had to be postponed and suspended during the conflict, but that this will be a really critical element going forward to ensure that the recovery is fueled by sustainable sources. Secondly, the energy reform, obviously a very critical area going forward, and one of the top priorities. Again, we have seen a lot of progress, particularly in terms of deregulation and unbundling of the gas and electricity markets, and the integration. There was much faster integration than anticipated into energy networks of the EU. Has been a very encouraging development and really, really important, proved really important during the conflict itself. However, we still see that the energy system is really undermined by inefficiencies in the markets, particularly in sort of legacy coal. Also, we see high losses, particularly technical losses, and a really underfunded infrastructure. So going forward, again, the conflict, the devastation, although is imposing a heavy burden, it also poses an opportunity in the sense that the reduced dependency on Russian imports, as well as reduced dependency on legacy systems and improved alignment with the EU, can build a really strong foundation for new alternative sources, energy-efficient infrastructure, and more competitive energy markets. And then finally, within the environmental and energy sector, the environmental protection is one area where we have seen probably the sort of least tangible progress, which is obviously a worrying sign. Although there has been some progress early on in terms of protection in biodiversity and sort of other natural resources, including forests and management of forests and wood markets. This seemed to have stagnated in recent years, and we have really seen a lot of threat from deforestation, urban expansion, and industrial activity, as well, of course, as the sort of direct effects and degradation of natural resources and pollution coming from the conflict, And we have particular areas where we have seen the least progress are critical areas such as water management and waste management. And particularly the latter one, waste management, we expect to be an incredibly important element in the post-conflict recovery, particularly due to the need for removal of a lot of the military equipment, hardware, as well as, of course, a lot of the destruction that has been caused by the conflict. So I'll pause there, and thank you so much. I'll hand over to my colleague, Ed.
Thanks, Mattis, and hello to you all. Ukraine has made considerable progress in its health reforms, in particular in areas such as the primary care provision, investing and strengthening the systems to improve that provision. Unfortunately, though, there are some worrying signals that can be seen even pre-Russian invasion. Chief amongst them are the declining number of medical practitioners in Ukraine's health service, and our research suggests that key factors in this declining practitioners are lower salaries in comparative terms and also poor working conditions that force Ukrainian doctors to seek employment abroad. Much like many of Ukraine's public services, the health service has suffered in the damage to its physical infrastructure as a result of the war with Ukraine. As a result, a key priority for future healthcare reforms must initially be to focus on the restoration of this physical infrastructure to ensure the equitable access to primary healthcare, but also to focus on the underlying issues such as the conditions and the employment conditions for sort of health employees. Similarly, in education, there has been some progress. Ukraine has successfully devolved responsibility for education to its local governments, creating a more dynamic education system, and critically, it's modernized that compulsory state education system and the content, importantly. It's also made efforts to improve the uptake of technical and vocational education and training, which of course is a key enabling factor to ensure that the workforce, the skills within the workforce, are aligned with labour market needs. Unfortunately, however, our data and research suggests that the uptake amongst young Ukrainians of this TV-ET services has been somewhat lacking, and so this is a key area for continued focus and also eventual progress. Similarly to the healthcare service, physical infrastructure for schools and educational institutions has been affected, but it should be highlighted that Ukraine's digital systems have made its education system incredibly resilient in these times of stress and difficulty. For example, the All Ukrainian online platform developed during the COVID-19 pandemic has allowed the continuation and the more efficient remote working and remote education systems that are required as unfortunately Ukrainians, children and students are forced to work from home. Human rights is also an area where we've seen considerable and commendable progress, and much of this can be seen in today's open and vibrant civil society. Key enabling factors and areas of progress have been the protection of human rights and also the allowing freedom within the media to speak out, to criticize openly, to foster discussion, and to drive progress and accountability critically among Ukraine's political circles and also civil society. It must be appreciated that martial law is absolutely necessary currently, but we should also be aware that the conditions of this martial law do unfortunately lead to the curtailment of economic, social, and cultural rights. We absolutely appreciate this is an absolute necessity currently, but it's also important to maintain that discussion about when possible, as soon as possible, once we are beyond this war, it should be a focus to return Ukraine to its trajectory of positive progress in the development and protection of human rights. Moving on to governments, one of the core success stories of Ukraine's reform agenda has been its digital transformation. This is no more apparent in the DIA platform and the broader DIA ecosystem, which has improved and enabled e-governance and supported engagement and accessibility for all Ukrainians. The DIA platform and its broader ecosystem has been shown to be remarkably resilient. The digital infrastructure and systems in place, backed up by improving cybersecurity, has allowed Ukrainian civic organization and also management of services during this difficult time. It should be noted, though, however, that, of course, the physical infrastructure has suffered also. And so the reconstruction of this physical infrastructure must be prioritized to ensure that the core underpinning of these digital systems maintains. Decentralization has been a similar success story. Ukraine successfully devolved and decentralized its powers into a three-tiered system, empowering regional and local authorities. And a core initiative among this was the promotion of the amalgamated Himradas. The decentralized system has allowed and empowered Ukraine to organize and to mobilize its resistance during the stresses of the current war. However, despite some tangible progress, we need to focus on the collaboration and coherence of these systems, ensuring appropriate accountability to enable the positive reform progress and recovery beyond this war. Finally, the rule of law and anti-corruption. This reform agenda has already been mentioned by our esteemed panel, and there are clearly issues here. It should be noted that we have seen some institutional progress. Successive governments have promoted a number of new and revitalized anti-corruption bodies. However, unfortunately, we continue to see the implementation gap. We need to work harder on the execution of some of these policies and ensure that these newly empowered institutions translate into more effective policies and progress within these areas. Public procurement, in particular in defense, and the progress made in these areas has made Ukraine more resilient in the current war. More responsible, transparent, and efficient defense spending has better prepared Ukraine's armed forces and improved the extent to which it was able to fend off the Russian invasion. And so credit must be given there. However, once the war is over, efforts should return to, where possible, improving transparency within those procurement processes, and also tackling the still present systemic corruption and unfortunately opaque judicial processes. The Ukraine Reform Tracker, as we've mentioned today, focuses on economic reforms, energy and environment reforms, governance reforms, and social reforms. And through these 4 reform categories, the Ukraine Reform Tracker aims to position itself as a long-term instrument for measuring Ukraine's reform progress and also enabling that transition towards recovery and long-term development. We will continue to promote the notion that continued progress in key reform areas is critical both for Ukraine's immediate post-war recovery and also long-term sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Coffee break.
Ні, оцю нижню, да? Да.
Behind us several success stories. This one is more of the first international story. Rather for that, that's
запрошую на наступну панель. Прошу повертатися до зали. Dear guests, I invite you to our second panel. Please return to... Да, поклич. Так, я бачу раз, два, три. Раз, два, три, чотири, п'ять, шість. Шановні гості, кому потрібен переклад, ви на реєстрації можете взяти собі обладнання. Dear guest who needs translation, you can take equipment at the registration, because some part of our panel will be in Ukrainian. Dear participants, we have two events that will be carried out simultaneously. Here we will have an event on civic society, and there is a parallel panel on inclusive reconstruction processes. Thank you. Ще раз повторюю, кому потрібен переклад, можете взяти обладнання на реєстрації. announcement. Again, I remind you that we have two parallel panels. Here we have a panel on civic society, and in the room, the door is behind you, there is a panel on inclusive reconstruction processes. Thank you. And my name is Oksana Romaniuk, and I will moderate this panel. The future comes slowly. This is what I hear all the time from our civic society, which is extremely energetic, which is ready to invest into building democracy, reconstruction, and progress in Ukraine. If there is something absent, we will create it and we will develop it. For instance, we have an idea to introduce criminal responsibility for those who invented, organized, and continue to produce Russian disinformation. We understood that there is no really legal framework to do that. But our aim is to see those perpetrators of propaganda that led to war, to see them in international tribunal. And besides, there is a huge nothing now. I strongly believe that our civic society will develop it and will even introduce changes in the international level. Today, we will talk about progress, inspiration, drives, about collaboration between civic society, state, business, in order to develop Ukraine. And I invite here our guests. Olena Shulyak, Member of Parliament, Head of Servants of People Party. Alexander Sushko, Executive Director of International Renaissance Foundation. Mikhailo Zhirnakov, Head of Board De Jure Foundation. Tetiana Pechonchik, Chairperson of the Board Zmina Human Rights Center. Oksana Velichko, Co-Chairperson of the RPR Coalition Board. Yuri Filyuk, Founder of Prom-Prilad Renovation. And Maria Helity, Deputy Chief of Party Usaid, Ukraine Civic Society Sectoral Support Activity, Isar-Yednanya. We started a little bit later. This is why I would kindly ask our participants to reduce timing of their remarks. Please be not more than 5 minutes. So my first question is to Olena. What mechanisms do we have now to build fruitful cooperation between the government, the parliament, and civic society? How you can benefit from civic society? How do you see this cooperation?
Доброго дня, шановні колеги, буду українською. Дякую за запрошення і за можливість брати участь в цій панелі і висловлювати свої думки стосовно того, як громадянське суспільство повинно долучатися до величезної роботи з відбудови нашої країни. Мені дуже подобається назва цієї панелі стосовно того, що громадянське суспільство може бути і основою, і воно може і надихати, може надавати можливості рухатись вперед для того, щоб було відновлення України. Для того, щоб
Apologies for not functioning simultaneous for a moment. We have to inspire the civil society to move forward so it could be moving forward and working for Ukraine.
Для того, щоб конструктивно досягати мети, потрібна взаємодія трьох чинників. Це громадянського суспільства, це безпосередньо і місцевої, і виконавчої влади, ну і безпосередньо самих донорів, які будуть приймати участь у відновленні.
In order for that to work, we'll have to have three components working: the civil society, local authorities, and the donors who are going to be participants in the process.
На жаль, в Україні є свої особливості, і найвищий рівень такої конструктивної роботи, він припадає тоді, коли в Україні є певні випробування. Так було в 2014 році, так було, коли прийшов в Україну ковід, і так є зараз, коли в Україні повномасштабне вторгнення Російської Федерації.
Unfortunately, the peculiarities of Ukrainian constructivism, they show up only when there's a challenge going on. That was in 2014, as well as a COVID situation, as well as now the full-scale war came around.
Я можу це спостерігати по нашим партійним організаціям, коли зараз є певна концентрація всіх зусиль, коли працюють з волонтерами, коли працюють з благодійними фондами, коли працюють з іншими громадськими організаціями, незважаючи на партійну приналежність.
I can also see it in our party affiliates when we're talking and working with volunteers, with charity organizations, and we don't pay attention to any party affiliation.
На жаль, у мирні часи рівень такої конструктивної взаємодії громадянського суспільства і влади завжди падає.
Unfortunately, when peace times come around, the level of constructive cooperation between the authorities and the NGO goes down.
Але хотілося б, що коли Україна переможе після такої страшної війни, жорсткої війни, яка зараз відбувається на території нашої країни, все ж таки ми не зробимо помилок минулого і зможемо працювати разом по відновленню країни. Вже можна, кажуть, працювати синхронно. Тепер давайте трошки детально про те, де може наше громадянське суспільство бути активно долученим до процесу відбудови нашої країни. Я сама 4,5 роки працювала в громадській організації БІРДІО, Офіс ефективного регулювання, перед тим, як прийшла в політику. Тому я дуже добре знаю, як працювати з однієї сторони і як працювати з іншої сторони. Але беззаперечно, я впевнена в тому, що саме в експертизі громадянське суспільство може допомагати владі на різних етапах. На сьогодні є дуже вдалий приклад, коли працює Національна рада з відновлення країни. Ви, мабуть, чули цифру, що більше ніж 2500 експертів з різних сфер залучено до роботи за десятками різними напрямами. Нас інколи як владу критикують і кажуть, що 2500 експертів – це дуже багато, вони не зможуть конструктивно співпрацювати, вони не зможуть надавати свої пропозиції, свої ідеї, а ви не зможете їх швидко обробляти. Але, на мій погляд, лише такий інклюзивний процес, коли кожен може бути долучений, висловлювати свою фахову позицію. І є дуже багато випадків, коли така фахова позиція була почута, внесена до певних документів. І сьогодні саме на конференції в Лугано ми можемо ці документи вже, вони будуть оприлюднені, вони будуть обговорюватись. І в цьому вже сьогодні є величезна роль і громадянського суспільства. Другий напрям, який без громадянського суспільства точно не вийде в Україну, це всі речі, які пов'язані з антикорупційною політикою, з антикорупційною експертизою. Майже 2 роки знадобилося українському парламенту і для того, щоб ухвалити антикорупційну стратегію. Це такий великий базовий стратегічний документ, який чомусь дуже важко заходив до сесійної зали. І скажу вам чесно, ми декілька разів його вимушені були знімати з порядку денного, тому що зібрати голоси в залі було практично неможливо. І буквально за декілька днів до того, коли Україна мала отримати кандидатство в Європейському Союзі, нам вдалося через парламент провести 2 важливих документи – це Стамбульська конвенція і антикорупційна стратегія, які надзвичайно важливі їх ухвалення для України в цілому. Тепер цю антикорупційну стратегію нам потрібно з вами буде всім разом втілювати в життя. І я думаю, що по кожному напряму в стратегії такими широкими мазками прописані певні речі, а нам це потрібно робити і на законодавчому рівні, і на рівні урядових постанов, і на рівні інших документів, де без і експертизи, і вашого бачення точно в нас не вийде. Звичайно, ми зараз дуже багато говоримо про те, яким чином буде відбудовуватись країна, і одне із таких великих запитань, а як будуть витрачатися кошти донорів? Ми дуже добре розуміємо, що в нас не буде власних коштів з державного бюджету, в нас буде обмаль коштів із місцевого бюджету, і величезну підтримку будуть надавати країни-донори. І яким чином будуть перевірятися, як витрачаються ці кошти, яким чином взагалі вони будуть розподілятися, за якими правилами. І на сьогодні дійсно такої немає єдиного механізму, немає єдиної методики, немає єдиних правил, як ці кошти будуть витрачатися. В мене сьогодні вже був виступ перед парламентарями Швейцарії, і я запропонувала створити таку міжпарламентську платформу між нашими парламентарями, між парламентарями інших країн і Швейцарії, в тому числі для того, щоб напрацювати єдині механізми, єдині правила, щоб вони були чесними, прозорими, зрозумілими для всіх, хто буде долучатися до процесу відновлення. І мені здається, що громадянське суспільство в цьому напрямі також може бути тією стороною, яка також повинна бути долучена до роботи такої платформи. І третій напрям, про який би я хотіла би вам сказати, де б нам хотілося, щоб громадянське суспільство активно працювало, це максимальне залучення українців до процесу відновлення і процесу відбудови країни. Ми знаємо, що є величезна кількість людей, які б хотіли би долучитися, кожен по своєму напряму, щось робити добре для країни, але він просто не знає, тобто немає такої певної інфраструктури, людина не знає, де він може прийти, де він може отримати певну інформацію, що йому там потрібно зробити там в першу чергу, що в другу. І тому саме громадянське суспільство, його інфраструктура може бути такими певними хабами по залученню людей, які зможуть працювати на благо нашої країни. І мені здається, що зараз ця основна місія – об'єднати українців, і не тільки українців, для того, щоб відновлювати країну, це наша така основна і головна задача. Дякую.
Thank you for very important remark that civic society will be involved. For us, it is also very important to be involved not only after the war, but now. Because civic society in Ukraine, I have already said that we are very energetic, we are able to fight and defend. But how to cooperate? How to turn this energy into cooperation? I ask Alexander Sushko, how do you think what should be done to engage civic society in cooperation?
Thank you so much. And really, it's a great pleasure to share with you my perspective of this problem, because really it's a huge variety of answers. So there is no one answer. There is not even one theme or one instrument which should prevail over the others. Because the question which we discuss is a question of culture, is a question of the very fundamental elements of our political and civic culture, which affects not only the effectiveness of the governance, of the interrelations between different segments of society, but also it affects the issue of the real ownership of the citizens when it comes to their own country. This is, for many years, it was one of the biggest problems was the distance, really gap, between the most of the society people and those who are somewhere on the top. Politicians, big businessmen. There were many examples when the people associated themselves with some grassroots society, but felt very much separated from the political process, from the impact, from the real belonging to this substantial decision-making. And so there was such a feeling that there are us and them. And the crises which we witnessed in the past, both Maidans, and the even bigger crisis which we face now with Russian intervention and aggression and continuous war, provides a chance for us to make this, to reduce the gap or even to eliminate the gap. And so this is the biggest, if we may have something positive in these tragic events, we have this positive chance to rebuild the feeling of unity between the wider society and the government, the state, between the people and those who are on the top. So this is what I usually call the feeling of ownership, feeling of belonging. And then there are many actors. I'm grateful to Valery Pecker, who mentioned this morning that there is no just registered NGOs which are around us. There are many, and now we see how many them, these active people who are organized along these informal networks, volunteers who do something, who do not ask for something, but they know what to do. And now we have this in these extraordinary circumstances, which is not the first time. We remember also 2014-15. We already have this experience. And we already have experience on what's going on, what happens after. And after what happens, and I will see it also, it will probably happen again. This feeling of frustration, that feeling of exhaustion, and it comes that we have to do this, to feel this, and to build these networks only under extraordinary circumstances. And this is probably the biggest challenge, how to do these practices normal, how to do this level of engagement which we see now, a normal type of the civic culture which goes beyond the bloody wars, which goes beyond these crises, which becomes a normal practice which society is doing with political establishment is welcoming on the side of society. So this is a matter of culture. And I think that here again we have this chance to elaborate and to strengthen and to make some lessons from the past, what we have done wrong when the civil society activism was some way lost. Certainly there are different levels of community. I think this is a fundamental one. When the people are closely interconnected with the administration, with the municipalities, with the local authorities. And there is a chance, again, and the decentralization has provided even new, more effective instruments of the constant and more substantial engagement between the active people and the authorities on the local level. Currently, I think that, but at the same time, we have seen various examples of miscommunication or wrong communication or lost chances of engagement, and then we had numerous conflicts on the local level. Instead of building sustainable networks, relationships between the active civil society on the ground and local administration, we have seen some examples of building fortresses against new decentralized authorities who felt themselves big bosses on the local ground, ignoring at the same time the willingness of people to be engaged. Regional level, there are also lots of experience, and we can again learn our lessons from the past. What works well, what doesn't work. And we have seen various forms of engagement, but we have also seen lots of failures on the level of big cities, on the level of oblast, and finally national level. Certainly there is already huge amount of examples, and you provided some examples on professional level, some specific networks such as anti-corruption, civil society activism, such as...
Dear Alexander, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would like...
Just one sentence in the end. So, my point here, so I did not deliver the concrete examples, because my approach is that this is a matter of culture, and we can understand it as a part of our cultural societal development, and take it seriously, and take it as a long-term need of our society and also political system to build constant working relationships between the active part of the society and political system, and then we will solve this fundamental problem of the big gap between the ordinary people and the political system, and then we will have a stronger state, stronger nation, stronger society. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the matter of fact. When there is strong civil society, there is a strong reform. There is a strong progress. And we do hope that lessons will be learned and civic society will be more engaged in a more transparent manner than it is now. And I address this question to Mikhailo Zhernakov. How do you feel now about the engagement of civic society and what is going on in the sphere of judicial reform?
Thank you very much. Hello, colleagues. Very happy to be here. I try to be brief, but I don't know if I can fit everything in 5 minutes. Let's see. I also will quote Valery Pekar, who spoke on the last panel. I very much like the analogy of the autopilot and the answering machine. And of course, you have to have civil society as a third actor in order to get reforms done, because quite honestly, if you look back 8 years, there hardly been, I know of 2 reforms that weren't developed, advocated for, and implemented without the participation of the civil society, or without the big part of the civil society, and that's not much by any measure. 2 reforms. The rest was huge. Civil society played a huge role in the rest. Now, when it comes to the plans of transformation, if we look, we have a historic decision by the EU, right? The candidacy status and the 7-point plan. We have the civil society plans. We already have the Lugano Declaration or the manifesto presented today. We also have this product here that's called Ukraine After the Victory. I invite you to follow the QR code and see that's a more comprehensive document. It's a first draft, though. We invite you to discuss it and to give feedback. And we have other plans by the civil society, obviously, and we have the government plans that will be presented in the main event today. The 3 do overlap, I think, because the government plan's development, at least when it comes to rule of law, unfortunately was less than inclusive. Let's put it this way. But they do overlap. But if there's 3 different plans, that's madness. We will not get very far if either of the 3 have their own plan. And I very much agree with Orisa, who said at the previous panel that would rather have, Kyiv Declaration or whatever is the place where it will be declared, that the 3 will finally get on track and have the same agenda, same reform agenda. That's something that I think is very important. Now, when it comes to judicial reform, I can't help but mention. Of course, it's paramount, and we do upload the EU decision, because on one end, it gave us the candidacy status that was long-awaited and, of course, very deserved. On the other hand, they have this. We all have now this 7-point plan, among which judicial reform is number 1. And of course, without the judicial reform, it's not just another important reform. It's the reform without which you will not have human rights protection, we will not have property rights protection, we will not have investment, will not have functioning economy, and we will not be able to win the war if we don't have rule of law. There's not a single developed country in the world that doesn't have independent courts, that doesn't have justice. So that is why we have to do this we absolutely have to do this to survive right now. The EU decision, the Euro Commission decision, specifically mentions 3 things: Constitutional Court, High Council of Justice, and High Qualification Commission, extremely important institutions. And we already have good progress here, luckily, and this is a good example of cooperation of the 3, civil society, the government, and the international community,
the judicial reforms adopted last July, the presidential laws that very much reflected the suggestions done by the civil society and the international community on rebuilding the judicial governance bodies based on huge success of the anti-corruption court, including independent international experts in the selection of the judges in Ukraine, which was, again, a great success in terms of anti-corruption court. Now we're doing this with the rest of the system, engaging independent international experts into rebooting the judicial governance bodies. That will, in the end right now, and this is very important, that will select half of Ukraine's judiciary for decades to come. Right now we have about 24 or about 3,000 vacancies in the judiciary. So they will be tasked with filling the vacancies, and they will hire thousands of judges that will define how Ukraine's judiciary will look like in the next decades. So the stakes are the highest we had in I don't know how many years. That is why it's extremely important, and it's very good that we have this reform. But now, when it comes to implementation, it's also important to keep this dialogue and to keep these talks and to keep connection between the three actors when it comes to implementation, because we right now have the High Council of Justice, the Ethics Council, that reforms it, that has international experts inside of it, that made 12 very powerful, very corrupt members of the High Council of Justice flee in terror because they didn't want they just resigned because they didn't want to undergo the integrity checks. But now we have problems when it comes to the selection of the new members, because the international experts in the Ethics Council do not listen to the civil society, and they stopped any communication with us, unfortunately. And now we have problems. Even though they act in good faith, we had to declare the civil society that judicial reform is not going the right way. So I hope we will, and I think we will be able to fix this, but there will not be success of the reforms if we do not, if there is no civil society involved. Take out the civil society and you're doomed to fail. And if there's no good communication between the actors, predominantly between the international community and the civil society. So in order to, and the worst that can happen right now, and I'm finishing, is if we continue like this with the judicial reform and it's failing and it's not successful and we have the same judiciary and the same judicial governance bodies, but the EU will say during the succession process, it will basically greenlight the reform saying, oh, everything is done by the books, you had your law, you had the international experts, hence reform is successful. If they greenlight this, which is not working, then we will not be able to reverse it in, I don't know, in the next decades, literally. So that is why it's important to, A, reestablish connection here, B, evaluate everything not by the books, but by the result. And last thing I want to mention is we have to make more civil society. Now we have now we have a huge challenge to reform not just some things that were successful after the Revolution of Dignity, but to reform the rest, which is, I don't know, 10 times maybe more, the amount. We have to have orders of magnitude more actors in the civil society, 10 times more actors in the civil society who will advocate, who will watchdog, and who will make change happen. So that is why the good news is we have now huge increased ownership of the country among the people. We have trust and we have social cohesion, and this is a very fertile ground to breed new civil society initiatives and organizations. And I invite all the donors to invest in this, so we have enough agents of change who will finish the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mikhailo. Civic society really can become that pillow that would support the government and will support development of Ukraine. And we have a lot of challenges. One of the biggest challenges, of course, is connected with the large-scale invasion of Russia, which affects really heavily human rights. There are plenty of crimes of aggression that are committed now in our country. And human rights agenda today is extremely important. Tatiana, how is human rights agenda integrated now into reforms? Do you see this integration at different levels, or it is narrowed to some certain legislation? How does it look like now?
Thank you. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you, Oksana. These 8 years of Russian armed aggression against Ukraine are extremely difficult time for us as civil society, as a state to operate, and the situation is becoming more grave. 8 years ago, we had 7% of our territory occupied by the Russian Federation, and now it's 20% of Ukrainian territory. In 2014, we had 1.5 million IDPs, and now we have 6.2 million internally displaced persons. We have millions of Ukrainian refugees who moved abroad. We have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who were deported forcibly to the territory of the Russian Federation. We have a huge scale of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the Russian army in the course of their armed aggression in Ukraine. And Russia is trying to eliminate resistance and all Ukrainian on the territories which are newly occupied by them. My NGO, Zmina, alone documented at least 234 cases of abductions and enforced disappearances of people, active people in the newly occupied areas. And these are local village heads, city mayors, journalists, activists, human rights defenders. 10 of them were tortured till death. Understanding the nature of this war as civilizational war, as attack of barbarism and tyranny to the values should lead us to the understanding of importance of human rights and civil liberties in the recovery process. When we open our constitution, or when we looked into the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, then we see that it starts from the chapter about human rights. But why don't we see this chapter at the beginning of the recovery plan for Ukraine? I think this is a key element that need to be at the first places in our recovery. And as for now, I see two obstacles and two possibilities for us as civil society to proceed with reforms, especially I'm speaking about the human rights related reforms. First problem which we see now is a temptation of authorities to seize rights and freedoms under the martial law. And this is important to understand that, of course, during martial law, some rights and freedoms can be limited. But sometimes we see that these limitations are unproportional, and that Ukrainian parliament is passing or trying to pass in the very on the very high speed some laws which have some non-democratic elements in it. And it is also important to preserve our freedoms, including freedom of speech under martial law. And here I would like to specifically mention the National TV Marathon. I think here we see a lot of prominent leaders of civil society in Lugano, but frankly speaking, I see their faces more often at the CNN, but not in the National TV Marathon. I think that our voices should be heard also on the national level in our national media space. The second challenge is reluctance of authorities to reforms and reluctance to strengthening the independent institutions. Just a few days ago, we've got a new Ombudsman of Ukraine, and as human rights defenders, we stated that nothing was changed with the procedure, and the independence of this institution was not respected as it did when the previous ombudsmans were elected. Also, we see that the reform of national public broadcaster Suspilne was not finished, and it still lacks funding, and it's important to ensure the independence of the national TV broadcaster.
Also, we have challenges with the independence of national media regulator, and we have to set up a basis for it, an open competition, and which is transparent for elections, selection of the member of the national media regulator. Also, we can speak also not only about these like media reforms, but about different spheres like the rights of the child, and also we see that the reform of the institutionalization was also stopped, and this is important when we speak about different categories of people, including childs, to continue reforms and to ensure the rights of the child on care and upbringing to the family, develop services on the community level, and to eliminate the places of deprivation for children, so-called internat, which are our Soviet heritage. And when we move to the EU, we have to go to the foster families and other types of child rights protection. But then the good news is that we have two good opportunities as civil society, and the crisis is for us is a very big possibility. First possibility is a possibility to boost civil society. And I remember that in 2014, during our when Russia attacked Ukraine, there were a lot of civil society groups that were strengthened, and the new initiatives that appeared in the human rights sector, it's many, like Vostok SOS, Donbass SOS, Crimea SOS, Media Initiative for Human Rights. There were many in other spheres too. And I think this new wave of Russian armed aggression in Ukraine also will lead to the strengthening of the existing civil society groups and to the appearance of many new ones. And also another possibility, second, that we have is the possibility, the new windows to continue reforms in Ukraine, especially when we are on the track to EU and we are going to obtain the EU membership, and EU provides us benchmarks on this road. We already, as human rights defenders, welcome the ratification of the Istanbul Convention by Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, and we also expect other human rights-related reforms like ratification of the Rome Statute, like harmonization of the Ukrainian criminal law with international standards, which will help us to investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity. We would like to see the strengthening of the independence of Ombudsman institution and many other things. And finishing, I wanted to say that coming to Lugano from The Hague, which is also another important city now for us. I was thinking that the name of Lugano reminds me the name of Ukrainian city of Lugansk, which is under occupation from 2014. And I hope and I dream that our joint efforts of Ukrainian authorities and civil society will lead to the day when we see the free Lugansk as prominent and as prosperous as Lugano in Switzerland. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana. We see really now a window of opportunity for cooperation between the government and civic society. We have experience of such cooperation when in 2014 RPR was created. Oksana, how do you assess now this level of cooperation and how actually coalitions of civic society are involved in this process? And I kindly remind our participants about 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Dear colleagues and guests, am I heard here?
No.
No, it's not working. First of all, as many speakers before, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to all international partners who helped in Ukraine in our darkest days. I personally, staying under the Russian occupation, can say how tremendous, how important, cordially important was this help for us. How terrible is it when suddenly such a blue sky and peaceful is starting to explore under you, and you are staying in a smoke and I hear that some houses around of me are burning. And I know that my mother is one of these houses. And how terrible is it when you know that your neighbor who was trying to escape is lying on the road because her car was shooted, and her husband was laying there for a week, we cannot pick up him. So the military support, first of all, of our international partners enable us to speak about the future recovery, and without it, we cannot even speak about it. So the military support, the humanitarian support, financial support helps us and to stand. And now there is no doubt for us that Ukraine will stand. Ukrainian civil society from the beginning of this war started to play an important role because we were trying to get some military support. We were trying to deliver to the people who need the humanitarian aid that was provided to us by our partners everywhere, from everywhere. But it was very difficult sometimes to get to the people. For example, I know that there were people very close to us that were having diabetic, and we were not able sometimes to distribute to them the medicine. So it is the darkest times of our life. And of course, we are joining our efforts. And even those days, I remember, like with local authority, we were calling to Olena's colleague in parliament, trying to find out some arms for our local people to protect ourselves. And now, when the discussion about the after-war recovery Ukraine started, of course, we are trying to gather our efforts as well, because we all have limited resources. And now our president announced the creating the body, council body, for recovery of Ukraine. And we are really welcome that to this council body, I invited many people, many representatives of civil society, also business and international partners. And the document that you have received at the beginning of the event contains top 10 reanimation package reform, this is on the screen, and other civil society priorities. These are quite broadly described here, but it is detailed in 20 sectoral briefs that are also presented now on a reanimation package reforms site. So you can see it and read it in detail. But I hear that many similar ideas are in the air. We are all speaking about the same. And we have not just to speak, but to do it together also with our parliament and with our government. And of course, this recommendation, they are not separate or opposite to the position of our authority and parliament. They are just emphasizing some ideas of civil society. And our mission as a civil society to ensure the effective, inclusive, and transparent process of recovery of Ukraine. Because, as also was told here, we don't have the clear rules how we are going to recover and what we are going to do at first. We have so many work to do. For example, at my district, where is my house robbed and murdered by the Russians, there is no other business left, nothing. Everything was ruined. Even hospital, all the shops, everything, even maternity house, from which the woman was trying to escape in the beginning of the first days of the war. So we believe and we are sure that the dialogue established between the parliament, government, and the Ukrainian civil society and international partners will lead us to success. And this is the basis for success. We cannot make such a tremendous work when we will be concentrated on our ambitions. We have to join our efforts and unite our strongs. And there is many ways to do it. Many ways. For example, my colleagues now are working in our local Bucha administration. They are just helping because I asked which help do you need, and our guy told us I need some hands to help me with the documents from the people who lost their houses. And I say, okay, I have 2 volunteers for you. And we are very ready to provide. We don't want just to sit and look how big problem we have. We need to do something for our country, and we are all willing to do for our country. So what we all expect, this is a willingness to work together, to help to rebuild and recover our beautiful country. And our future finishing, I would say that our future depends on our unity. And together we are able to do it. And to wake up our country and to help to rebuild it, but also rebuilding our houses, we have to remember also about the clear and democratic political process, which is also very important. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Oksana. When the war started, before the large-scale invasion, we had our normal lives. We had draft laws registered in parliament. We had initiatives at regional, national level. When the invasion started, in addition to all that work, appeared some individual sacrifice, appeared participation in humanitarian activities, in some kind building of economics of gift and donation. And I would like to introduce you the example of an initiative which was very strong before the war, but which really became stronger after the invasion and developed new ways of response and is even thinking about future. This is an example which I think very important for the government to look at and understand how really cool is civic society in Ukraine and how much they can benefit from it. Yuri Filuk, please.
Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to say that I strongly believe in the power of two things: the power of decentralization, and second, the power of cross-sectoral cooperation between civil society, business, and state on different levels. And 8 years ago, we set up a city development NGO platform Teple Mista in Ivano-Frankivsk and started unite people step by step, people and institutions, and generate trust, realizing together different projects in such fields like art, education, new economy development, urban development, energy efficiency, sport, sustainable mobility, social entrepreneurship, new media creation, and so on. And we've realized more than 500 different initiatives together with efforts of city inhabitants and different institutions in cross-sectoral way. And what do we have now? We have already effective dialogue and effective cooperation within the triangle: business, city development, public authorities, and civil society. And we also tried to use innovations and look for new possibilities and not to orient on the gaps, but looking for new ideas and new options. And for example, Urban Space 100 was one of the first social entrepreneurship in Ukraine realized in Ivano-Frankivsk. And now we are realizing another new model for Ukraine, impact investing project from road renovation with the budget more than $30 million. And that's maybe the most ambitious civil society project in Ukraine. And now we've raised already $15 million from 1,200 people from 20 countries. And we have support of 14 international and national institutions from all the world. And that's a kind of example how it's possible with bottom-up approach, with trust generating step by step, and with organizing this effective dialogue to build examples how to transform the whole region. And what is important also for us, to create the precedent and example for replication, because Ivano-Frankivsk is not unique with this perspective. These approaches are possible to realize in any region of Ukraine, and I strongly believe that there is ideal predictions to realize effective cooperation, cross-sectoral cooperation again in every region of Ukraine. And that's why I like the decentralization too. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, dear Yuri. And for the concluding remarks, I invite here Maria Heletei, Deputy Chief of Party Usaid Ukraine Civic Society Sectoral Support Activity ISAR Єднання. Please, Maria.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to see all your faces. And I think it's first time when we met with many of you after the beginning of the war. It's so happy also to see you because you are with us, and it means that you are continue to bring good and positive things to civil society of Ukraine and also to our society. For me, this event, it is a kind of dream came true, because we worked a lot during the last weeks to make it happen. And I would like to thank you, those who really helped to organize this event and to make it happen. First of all, I would like to thank you, the Embassy of Switzerland in Ukraine, who contributed a lot to organize this event, civil society side event during the URC, and also help us with a lot of logistical and thematical issues. I would like to thank you, government, who allow us to have this event. I want to thank you, the EU delegation to Ukraine, the Usaid Ukraine, and also other donors who supported the civil society event and also participation of civil society representatives here. And finally, I want to thank you, civil society, because you came here, you do a lot of things for Ukraine, and you did a lot of things since the beginning of the war to help people, to help country, to help government. To be very short, actually, what I've learned from this panel, that the collaboration between public authorities, between government, local authorities, between civil society, private sector, and international community is vitally important. We could not rebuild Ukraine by only themselves. We need this collaboration because we all have different expertise. We have different knowledge and we have different resources. And we can work together, not when we are under one umbrella, but we need to be decentralized. We need to know and understand the needs of the particular target groups, of particular communities, and only then we can respond to this challenging situation. We have to think about human rights. The human rights shall be included in the national recovery strategy, because you can't build strong economically and democratic country without respecting human rights. And if the war forced us to limit our rights, it doesn't mean that after the war, the situation should not be restored. The human rights shall be respected even during the war. The limitations shall be proportional, and they shall reflect the needs of the security of the country. Moreover, we would ask international community and international donors support civil society in this effort. And, during many meetings with international community, when they asked about what civil society needs, unfortunately, in these days, civil society needs weapons, because the space of civil society depends on military support to Ukraine. Activists in Ukraine are dying because our country could not protect them, because we do not have sufficient heavy weapon, to be able to counteract Russian aggression. We also would like to thank you, Olena Shulyak, for her understanding of the collaboration between civil society and parliament. And we do have the great collaboration between parliament and civil society. Also, we have good collaboration between civil society and government. With this collaboration, we managed to adopt a lot of very positive policies, very positive regulations for civil society and for country. I just want to thank also for recent legal acts which were adopted or registered in the parliament. It's regulation for volunteering, which was adopted in the first reading and which was developed with the collaboration with the Parliament. And also, as you may know, in the Parliament we have registered draft laws for introducing tax designation mechanisms. And we do expect that parliamentarians will support these draft laws, and we will have another opportunity to support civil society through tax designation mechanisms, through donating 2% tax to one or two civil society organizations. And finally, I would like to say, to tell that we need to be united, because the only unity would help us first to overcome this challenge which we have, war. It would help us to defeat the enemy, and finally rebuild the country and make this country much better, much prosperous, and more democratic. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to our panel. Thank you to you, and please come to the conference, which starts in 20 minutes. Дякую вам теж.
Ну, так. Дуже радий.